Uh-oh.
I hope Alicia Baumgardner gets that Laila Ali cosign, because that's what Claressa's missing. And she's so much of a narcissist that she blew the chance to get that torch. Laila Ali is a torch person. Like when you talk women's boxing to a casual, Laila Ali name still comes up. And by her hating on Laila Ali never passed that torch to her. I hope Alicia Baumgardner get that torch, because sometimes it be the wrong people on top.
Is that really what's holding Claressa Shields back? That she doesn't have Laila Ali's blessing, that Laila didn't pass the proverbial torch to her? The beef between them started years ago when Laila was asked if she would ever come back to boxing, to which Laila responded she doesn't see anybody out there that inspires her to come back, to have to put on hold everything she'd have to commit herself and her body back to boxing. She doesn't see anybody. Claressa Shields took offense.
She was just getting started at this time.
I think that's too much of a simplistic view, that because Laila didn't pass a proverbial torch to Claressa, that's what's holding her back. I think
Claressa is what's holding back Claressa.
Because here you have a double gold medalist who's been an undisputed champion across 3 divisions, but where are the corporate sponsorships, and where are the endorsements? Where are the big TV ratings? Where's the grassroots demand? To use Laila as the reason that Claressa don't got these things, I don't buy it.
No, we often talk about her abrasive personality, how she basically expects everybody to grovel at her feet, Laila Ali included. That doesn't help.
But it also doesn't help that she's in these barren weight classes where your average boxing fan can't name 5 heavyweight contenders they would like to see Claressa fight.
In truth, it's always been that way. At junior middle, super middle.
If you were lucky, you could name at least one fighter or one champion at those weights that Claressa could have fought, but it's even worse now at heavyweight because there's nobody up there.
It's a huge problem because there's no frick to her frack.
No demand. There is no demand to see Claressa Shields fight anybody in the heavyweight division because nobody knows anybody in the heavyweight division. The talent pool is shallow. What is often understated by many a Claressa Shields fan is a fundamental problem in the greater scheme of things.
A huge problem.
And it would be the same thing if she moved down to light heavyweight. There are no super fights anywhere in between heavyweight to light heavyweight. At super middle, there's maybe one, but we saw it already.
The Savannah Marshall fight.
And so often, Claressa Shields' name gets attached to fights with women that are so much smaller than she is, there is no middle ground to do a fight between Claressa and Katie, or Claressa and Alicia. If she's all the way up there at heavy, and they're somewhere down there in between 130 and 140, there's no middle ground for a discrepancy in weight that broad. It's mostly casuals having those conversations, but that's basically saying there are no interesting fights for Claressa at her own weights. All they can do is fantasize about her fighting naturally smaller women in fights that are not going to happen. So when Two Tone says
he would like for Laila to pass the torch to Alicia.
All the super fights that Claressa Shields doesn't have, all those options, Alicia does have, because she has the option of moving up and fighting Beatrice Ferreira or Caroline Dubois. That is a conversation that is gaining momentum. There is also a potential rematch with Michaela Mayer.
These are densely populated weight classes with many fighters in them, many potential fights for an Alicia Baumgardner.
All the options Claressa doesn't have. Potential super fights that are being built. as we speak. I know some people don't want to hear this, but there are not a lot of women that size that would campaign as a heavyweight or a light heavyweight, and if they do have that kind of size, odds are they're not boxers.
Median height and the median size of a woman overall lends itself to the lower weights, and it's not a coincidence that you find more fighters, you find more women boxers at those lower weights.
I don't think Claressa Shields' problem is as simple as saying that because she never got Laila Ali's blessing, that's what's been holding her back. There are one or some other things that have always held her back. Her abrasive attitude is one, the empty divisions she campaigns in is another.
And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Elsewhere in the world of boxing, forget Conor-Benn rematch, Chris Eubank Jr. should now focus on Canelo Alvarez. London. Not only did Chris Eubank Jr. settle his festering feud with Conor Benn on Saturday, he also kept up a family tradition. But now it's time for Eubank Jr. to move on from the rivalry and pursue a fight versus Canelo Alvarez. The Eubank family are now 2-0 with one draw in one of boxing's longest and most famous rivalries. Eubank Jr.'s unanimous points win. After a fierce fight follows Chris Eubank Sr.'s stoppage win over Conor's dad, Nigel, for the world middleweight title in 1990, and a controversial draw for the world super middleweight title 3 years later.
Well, how could anybody make the recommendation that Chris should now focus on Canelo Alvarez after he just went life or death with a welterweight or a junior middle?
What the hell is he going to do with Canelo Alvarez at super middle? What it reminds me of is how years ago Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward were able to give us one of the best trilogies that boxing has ever seen, gutting and gritty.
Ancient history now.
So that when that same Arturo Gatti was faced with an elite fighter in Floyd Mayweather, he was thoroughly outclassed. He didn't belong in the same ring with him.
And that's what I think about Chris and Canelo.
There was a happy moment this past weekend when Eubank Jr. was reunited with his father after a recent fallout. Chris Jr. last week lamented about his dad, Chris recently labeling him a disgrace for smashing an egg on Benn at a press conference. But in a surprise twist, Chris Sr. arrived at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with his son to see him later deliver an inspired display. The appearance of Chris Sr. was a punch none of us saw coming, and it was a huge morale boost for Eubank Jr., who went on to have moments of dominance in the fight. He withstood Benn's furious assaults and replied with his own, while his jab was a reliable force throughout. In round 4, Eubank uncorked a belter of a right uppercut that Benn did well to absorb, just as Chris came through an attritional encounter to pounce on a hurt Nigel, and force a stoppage in round 9 of what was their WBO middleweight title fight back in 1990. Chris Jr. rebounded from a disorganized round 10 to dominate the final rounds in the non-title middleweight bout. Benn, 28, looked in trouble in round 12, but bravely resisted the onslaught in his first professional defeat.
Well, I know that a lot of the Brits are looking at this as a feel-good moment in what was a British classic, and I don't deny that it was.
Everything coming together the way that it did. Chris Eubank Sr. deciding to be there, and the aesthetic of the fight that delivered much more than I expected it to. It was fun.
But now it's time for the inconvenient truth. I feel like that fight was a better advertisement for Conor Benn than it was for Chris Eubank Jr., who was released from the hospital earlier today.
He just got out. Do you understand what that means? That means that a welterweight put Chris Eubank Jr. in a hospital for a day and a half.
Well, didn't Conor fight at junior middle?
Yeah, he had 2 tune-up fights against 2 tune-up kind of guys at junior middle. You can look at his physical dimensions, his frame, and see that he's not a bona fide junior middle. Conor is built like a welter, and not a very big one either.
My honest opinion is that fight was a better advertisement for Conor than it was for Chris.
Could this win over Conor now be as transformational for Chris Jr.'s career as Chris Sr.'s win over Nigel Benn was for him? Chris Jr. is 35, from Brighton, was 1 year old when his dad beat Nigel in Birmingham to win his first world title. Chris Jr. has yet to win a full version of one, of the 4 world titles, but his win over Conor should propel him to a world title shot later this year. He is ranked at number 3 with the World Boxing Council and IBF world governing bodies, whose champions are Eubank Jr. and Carlos Adames, respectively.
Both those guys beat Chris. Are you kidding?
However, given his trouble at making the 160-pound weight limit, it would not be a surprise to see Eubank Jr. operate at super middle. He marginally missed the weight this past Friday and had to pay a $500,000 penalty. Eubank Jr. also had to adhere to a 10-pound rehydration clause, meaning that he could not weigh over 170 pounds on Saturday morning. Eubank Jr. would be a tough fight for Canelo, but the English fighter might go in another direction now.
Tough fight for Eubank. Are you kidding me? Look at what he just went through with an unproven welterweight who never even fought for a title at welterweight. If you had to go through all of that just to beat Conor, Eubank is sure to knock you out.
Bigger and more lucrative opportunities are on offer for Eubank Jr. at super middle, such as a shot at boxing's premier attraction, Canelo Alvarez from Mexico.
You often hear it said about Canelo that he hasn't knocked anybody out in a while. If he ever finds himself opposite the ring Chris Eubank, how do you think that ends?
The WBC, WBA, and WBO World Super Middleweight Champion will face William Skull this Saturday, and if he wins, Canelo will progress to take on American Terence Crawford. Saudi Arabia's Riyadh season has already discussed the potential of Canelo and Eubank Jr. colliding in the coming year, but that timeline allows Eubank Jr. to fight once more this one. Benn, who lives in Essex, after being raised in Spain and Australia, hinted he will stay at middleweight after the fight, but he might find better opportunities to win a first world title down at either junior middle or welter.
After the fight, Eddie Hearn said that the terms have been already ironed out for a rematch, for a second fight.
Same weight, same money, same everything. But what you have to ask yourself is, are Conor's chances to win in a rematch good enough that he should stay here? Because if they're not, perhaps moving down.
In the spirit of longevity.
Conor didn't make a full 160. He weighed in at 156 officially, so it's not too late for him to move back down to welter. But if you spend the entire calendar year at this weight, at middle,
getting down to 147 will only become more difficult.
After a year at middle, it's a conundrum indeed, because if nothing else, you know you stand to make big money, very big money fighting Chris Eubank Jr. again in the short term, but what does that do to your career in the long term?
Got to think about the future.
Where Chris Eubank Jr. really doesn't have to, because he's already been around a long time. He's already in his mid-30s, 35 going on 36. His career is winding down.
Cashing out with Canelo in a fight he stands no chance of winning is just what the doctor ordered for Chris.
Chris doesn't really have to think about the next year, the next 2 or 3 years of his boxing career, but Conor does, because he's just 28 years old. Conor started off this year by calling for a fight with Mario Barrios, who's now rumored to be facing Manny Pacquiao over the summer months.
We'll see if that happens.
As I've seen some speculate that Barrios versus Pacquiao isn't real, it's a rumor that the PBC started so that they could siphon more money from a Conor Benn fight.
What?
By saying that you're committed to a Pacquiao fight, you can then ask for more money for a Conor Benn fight. That if you want us to ditch Manny, it's gonna cost you.
What?
The timing of it all, that these rumors about a Barrios versus Pacquiao fight only resurfaced on the eve of the Benn versus Eubank fight. A strategic play.
That's not the craziest thing I ever heard.
But the validity of that perspective will be tested this summer when either Manny does fight Mario or he doesn't.
Chris and Conor.
Their meeting was so good that I don't mind the idea of a second fight in September. I don't mind it, but I also wouldn't mind seeing Conor return to the welterweight division. I wouldn't mind if they went their separate ways.
Chris and Canelo?
Canelo knocks him out. I don't have a doubt in my mind, based on what I saw on Saturday, that if that same Chris Eubank Jr. fights Canelo Alvarez, Canelo stops him. But before we get there, Canelo's got to beat William Skull and Terence Crawford.
You'll have to table this conversation for now. Chris still has time to have one more fight before this year is out. Is it going to be with Conor? Is it going to be with somebody else? Because if the goal now becomes fighting Canelo at super middleweight, you've got to keep busy, because he's busy.
He's not available right now. So what are you going to do?
In association with that fight, another installment of Ring IQ Hate Mail, where some disgruntled Karens want to give me a piece of their mind, and I address them.
Guy who goes by the real name Tony said, I haven't watched a second of your videos for months, maybe a year plus, and you're still simping for Edward. He doesn't know you. The dude is Kleinfeld from Carlito's Way. He's a herb. Without rehydration clause and promotional shenanigans, 154 Conor is still asleep. Stop simping if you can.
As soon as you stop lying.
Where you say that you haven't watched a second of my videos in over a year's time, what were you doing here 4 months ago?
Not watching my videos?
What were you doing here 5 months ago?
Not watching my videos?
Here he is again. Not but 5 months ago. And I can go on. It's never a good idea to start off lying, because it almost immediately invalidates any perspective you have. Anything you have to say. You got in your tits over what?
Because I didn't play Chris Eubank Jr. the violin? I'm not going to. You say that without a rehydration clause and promotional shenanigans, Conor would have been asleep?
Maybe, but without Chris Eubank Jr. fighting Conor, Chris would have been asleep. If you would have chose to fight Lara, if you would have chose to fight Yanibek, if you would have chose to take the money they offered you for Hamza Shiraz, a multi-million-dollar offer for a non-title fight, there has to be a reason you chose to fight the smaller man.
Guy who spent most of his career as a welterweight. You think you're saying something?
You're angry that I'm not making Chris out to be the victim because he isn't one. He volunteered for this. If you sign on to fight Conor again after he tested positive for a banned substance, you're not a victim, you're a participant.
There was a rehydration clause in the first contract over 2 years ago, and there was a rehydration clause in this one over 2 years later. You were fully informed and fully aware. You made a decision.
He's in his mid-30s. He's not a little boy. That I need to play him a violin for what he subjects himself to. He made $10 million on Saturday, maybe more, and I'm supposed to feel sorry for him?
There's nothing noble about turning down fights with guys at your own weight to fight a smaller man in Conor Benn. That's not simping, that's reality.
When emotion overrides logic, apparently this guy has an axe to grind with Eddie Hearn.
Oh, he's Kleinfeld.
I don't know who the hell that is. I don't care either, because all I did was stick to the facts. You say that without a rehydration clause, Chris probably would have knocked out Conor Benn. Maybe that's true.
Is that supposed to be a feather in his cap that he could knock out someone that much smaller than he is and less experienced?
Real name, Tony. If that even is your real name, since you started off this conversation by lying, you can go back to not watching this channel as you claim, because this is not one of the bigger channels in the YTBC or even one of the older ones. There are plenty of other places you can go to find more like-minded individuals like yourself
that tell the story the way that you want it told. But here we stick to the facts. And the fact of the matter is, Chris Eubank Jr. is no more noble than Conor Benn for accepting this fight.
Boo-hoo-hoo. You had to accept a rehydration clause to fight a guy who spent the majority of his career as a welterweight, and you made $10 million. Boo-hoo-hoo.
If you don't want to be subject to any weight stipulations, then fight people at your own weight. Pick on someone your own size.
Boo-hoo-hoo. Real name Tony doesn't like me saying that. Then stop coming here.
Karen.
Something's got to be wrong with this guy that you willfully come here for months on end pretending that you don't.
Because you thought I couldn't check.
Because I'm telling you, there ain't no good guys or bad guys in this story. Just willing participants.
Grow up, Tony.